Hey, all, and welcome back to another episode of There's Danger Here. I'm Leilani,
And I'm Sam.
and today we're going into the 30s.
30s.
30s. I told you I can't get out of this time.
Yeah.
I don't know how I accidentally did, 3 cases in a row of 30, like 30s, 40s.
I mean, they're at like the prime age of like when they're committing their crimes,
Yeah,
of it being like the perfect environment for these criminals to commit crimes.
I feel like that's true, but I don't know. There's always people committing crimes, so
That is true. It's just so much harder these days.
you would think so, but we still have serial killers out there.
I know. We got to cover the New York one.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's on you.
Okay. I'm on it. It's
I would
still
like to
like
be the one.
pending.
I want to be the one that listens to it.
Okay. It's still pending,
Yeah.
but I lived in New York at the time, so
Yeah.
I was not a brown-headed prostitute though, so
Oh, so you survived.
I was okay.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Donald Gaskins was born on March 19th, 1933 in Florence County, South Carolina, to single mother Parrott. They don't give her first name.
Oh my God, that's a great name.
Yeah, that's her last name.
Oh, okay.
Parrott was not a good mother, according to all the information I could find. She found her love in a revolving door of grown men rather than her own son.
Hmm.
As a result, by the time he was 1, he was left to play alone in the home.
Oh God.
And with no surprise there, he got into things that he shouldn't have. This included kerosene,
Oh my God.
which he drank. The
Oh,
kerosene is believed to be the reason he suffered from convulsions until 3. He also had nightmares throughout his young years, and his growth was stunted, resulting in an adult height of 5'4".
oh wow.
Even after the kerosene ingestion, he continued to be neglected by his mother. She allowed her
She
brothers.
was able to keep him?
Yeah, different time.
I guess so. My
Yeah.
God.
This is back in the time where they're like, what you do behind closed doors is what you do in closed
Yeah,
doors.
but it,
There's no such thing as, neglect and child abuse and things like that.
oh,
hmm So she allowed her brothers to use corporal punishment on Donald, as well as refusing to use his name. Instead, they called him Pee-wee, a name
oh,
that stayed with him for the rest of his life. And I'm going to call him Pee-wee through this because
he deserves it.
he deserves it.
Okay.
Okay. Pee-wee himself says of this time, quote, "Being born on a farm, I know the difference between raising something and it just growing. You don't raise tobacco and vegetables to harvest and pigs and sheep to butcher. They got purpose. You tend them, but weeds grow on their own, tended or not. I grew. I weren't raised. That's for damn sure." End
Wow.
quote.
It's a great quote.
Yeah. The men Parrot saw were also often known to beat Pee-wee. And Parrot married Hannah when Pee-wee was young, and he said of the man, quote, "The one she finally did marry was one mean son of a bitch. He used to backhand me and knock me clean across the room just for practice. Though he," end quote, sorry. Though he does say his childhood was actually fairly good, that he had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, all born after Pee-wee was school aged, and his mother ended up being a good cook.
Hmm.
For a while, on Saturdays, people would bring over items for Pee-wee to fix, such as sewing machines and radios. And he said his peers were also just as cruel of him. So he goes back and forth being like, yeah, it really wasn't that bad. Like, I was pretty good at fixing things, so people would bring items over and I'd get a little cash for doing that. And he's like, but also, everybody sucked and everybody
Yeah.
was cruel. And you're like, what? That's a dichotomy.
Yeah. His childhood wasn't good.
No. So his peers would call him names and beat him, and Pee-wee hated school as a result, though he purports it wasn't just because he was beaten, but he believed school was a waste. Pee-wee wanted to become a mechanic, but his stepfather told him that he didn't need to bother with school, and he was going to go work in the fields to increase work at home.
Hmm.
Beating Pee-wee anytime he did anything other than that. So still by age 11, Pee-wee dropped out of school, meeting 2 other kids his age, Danny and Marsh, that had also dropped out of school. And together they formed a street gang called the Trouble Trio
Oh my God.
and began committing petty crimes throughout Florence County. Of course.
Little 11-year-old boys.
They focused on burglary and gambling, hiding their loot in Pee-wee's barn. The trio learned how to break into houses and how to sell off their loot without getting caught by taking the advice of Danny's father. They were successful for 2 years in their ventures and even saved enough to buy a '36 Ford. They would go to Columbia or Charleston to the military bases, which started their sexual life
Hmm.
by going to see sex workers in the area and eventually sexually assaulting several boys in the county.
Whoa.
hmm Eventually, they turned on their own family, um, assaulting Marsh's 13-year-old sister. While they were beaten by their parents, there were no formal punishments. But being beaten is an understatement. According to Pee Wee, Marsh's mom punched him in the face, knocking him out. And when he came to, the boys were strung up in the barn and whipped with belts and pine slats.
Wow.
That Marsh and he were both bleeding from the back and legs. Pee Wee had a belt strapped around his penis and balls while he was beaten.
Whoa.
Marsh's face was black and blue from the beating as well. But as for Danny, he went home and told his father what the boys had done, and so Danny's father waited on the porch for Marsh's parents. When they arrived, he said if they got out of the vehicle, he'd shoot them with the shotgun that he had laid across his lap. That if they dared to go the law, he'd kill Marsh's whole family.
Whoa.
Yeah, so that's the kind of dad he's got. The next day, the three boys met up, and Marsh said that he had to leave, lest his own family kill him. They split the money that they had gotten, or that they had made from selling stolen items, and Marsh caught a bus out of town that day. Danny's dad said they too should get out of town, and 2 days later, their house was vacant. Pee Wee would receive a postcard from Marsh once in a while, and one day he received $75 from Danny after the Ford was sold,
$75.
which is a lot in that
I
time.
guess that's a lot, yeah. I'm thinking about like those parents who tied up those kids in the barn, like how the concept of like it takes a village. Like I can't imagine finding out that even if my kid had done something egregious,
hmm
but that like their friends' parents beat them senselessly, I would be
So
like,
I think all the parents got involved, is what it sounds like, except for Danny. So after they had attacked the little girl, they sent her home and were like, "Keep your fucking mouth shut," which of course she didn't.
uh-huh.
And the three boys, so Danny was the oldest of all of them, and so he's the one that usually drove the truck. And so he dropped off Marsh and um, Pee Wee, and no, excuse me. So they dropped off Marsh and the sister, and then he dropped off Pee Wee and then went home. So Pee Wee said that he was sitting on like his front porch when the car came like careening up the driveway,
Mm,
and the mom came out and literally just ran up to him, punched him in the face, and knocked him out.
wow.
And then told the parents what happened, and they strung the boys up in the barn. And so I think his own
Okay, so
parents
they were
beat
like
him.
in it together.
hmm
Okay,
Yeah. So like we're not going to the law, but
right.
we're gonna fuck you up.
That
And they
makes a little
did.
more sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Because now I'm seeing it from the mother's point of view where she's coming in and saying, they just like molested my 13-year-old or whatever
hmm
it was, and then going, let's fuck these people. Let's
Yeah,
fuck our kids up.
yeah,
Like they can't ever do this again.
yeah. And
Yeah,
it was pretty brutal what they did to the 13-year-old. I'm not gonna go into
right.
I'm not gonna go
I
into
don't
but it
need
was
to
bad.
know.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how that started.
Okay.
For a time, Pee Wee continued working, repairing people's items for them, but then he met a man named Walt who asked if there was any easy money to be made, and they discussed breaking into houses and selling goods. For a while, the two met up every other Saturday and would break into a house and steal items to sell. In 1946, at just 13, Pee Wee broke into a home close to his own because the family was supposed to be at a funeral. He walked into the kitchen to burglarize it, but a girl he knew was there, and she picked up a hatchet and went after him. Unfortunately, he was able to get control of the hatchet,
Oh,
using it on the girl. And according to Pee Wee, he used the blunt end to hit her. With the first blow, she was knocked out, but he hit her a few more times. Afterwards, he continued the burglary before hearing someone come to in the back door, and he took off, and as he ran, he heard a shotgun fire as he hit the edge of the woods. He made it home 10 minutes before the sheriff and the two deputies came to his house. For this, Pee Wee was convicted of attempted murder. Due to his age, he was sent to a reform school, which we know are notoriously terrible, to which he remained until his 18th birthday.
Mm.
Pee-wee arrived here, and it's actually where he found out that his birth name was in fact Donald, not Pee-wee.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really sad.
The reform school was in South Carolina and was the South Carolina Industrial School for Boys and happened to be located a few miles from where he grew up. Immediately upon arrival, he was beaten and gang raped by several other boys. He quickly realized that in order to make it through, he needed to service the strongest boy on the block in order to earn his protection. And he said that at this time he went to a boy named Paz. Though he was still traded at times to other boys during deals. In order to get away, Pee-wee literally needed to escape juvie. And after serving his first year, he and 4 other boys took off, wielding a knife stolen from a mess hall. Pee-wee managed to make it to his old hideout in Florence County before being spotted by a local police officer who knew him and convinced Pee-wee to turn himself in. Upon return, he was punished with 30 lashes and a month of hard labor.
Hmm.
The second time he escaped,
Okay.
he left with one person and eluded authorities for 6 days before dogs were used to find out him hiding out in the woods.
I mean, the recent stories we've been doing, it's escape artists and then dogs who save the day.
Yeah, it sure is. Again, he was returned, beaten, and this time given 4 months hard labor. By this time, Paws was gone, and there was a new boss boy who Pee-wee says was meaner and liked Pee-wee to watch him be gang raped. His third attempt was solo for escape. He ran to his aunt's on a farm in Williamsburg County, staying and doing chores in exchange for room and board. But one day, while his aunt was out shopping, she returned with Wilson Parrott, a member of the family, and a police officer.
Mm.
He was told there was a deal for no punishment with the superintendent, Norman Huckabee. Instead, when he got back, he was sent to isolation and received 20 lashings every day. After asking to go to the infirmary for the sores on his back and legs, he was given 10 extra lashings for complaining. So Pee-wee beat the guard and gave him the lashings.
Oh, wow.
For this, 2 other guards beat him and he was sent to isolation. Then in the morning, he was manacled and brought to the superintendent. Huckabee said he was going to the state mental hospital for the attack. So Pee-wee was sent, and he spent 5 weeks in solitary cell where he was allowed to shower once a week. He also spent 2 hours with a psychiatrist, and during this time, his appendix ruptured, and he went to an actual hospital to have it removed. When he was better, he went back to the reformatory school rather than the state hospital and was kept in isolation for an additional 3 months before being sent out on a work crew once again.
Wow. I mean,
What a whirlwind already.
yeah,
He's not 18 yet.
I know. I mean, you can tell by the decisions he's making. He's going back to his auntie's house. Like, what?
Yeah,
Oh, Pee-wee.
I know. Pee-wee said that night before he was set to work on the work crew, an officer came up and told him he was going to write him up every day for beating the other officer. So he decided it was time to run
It's
again.
time to leave.
This time sprinting out as soon as he took out like garbage cans from the kitchen. And this was the 4th time he ran off. And this time he met with Poss's uncle, who put him in touch with a traveling circus. So
There you
Poss
go.
is again the
The
head
big
boy.
guy.
Yeah. At first, he was a rustabout.
The traveling circus.
Mhm.
He's a carny.
Yep. So he was a rustabout, which was the person who helped set up and take down for shows. But because of the appendix problem, he ended up getting a hernia, and so his uncle got him a job as a night watching the wagons instead.
Oh my gosh.
Here he met Mary, a 13-and-a-half-year-old, and he begged her to marry him, but she said she wouldn't marry a man she couldn't walk down the street with. So he agreed to go back to reform school after they got married. So they married on January 22nd, 1951.
Wait.
They're both underage. Yes, I am aware. And the next day he surrendered to Johnsonville police. When he got back to school, he went to solitary for the rest of his sentence for what was supposed to be, at least. That was until Pee-wee put his skills he learned in the carnival to use. One being how to pick locks.
Oh god. I mean, so he's also like, so love is blind, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are free. You're with the circus now. Just accept your beautiful little circus life. But instead, you fall in love with a girl who says you need to go
Finish your
back.
time.
Like, that's crazy. You'd
Yeah.
be like, nah, I'll find another girl.
Oh, yeah. So he would use his belt to pick the locks of the isolation doors, and the superintendent called Pee Wee into his office, agreeing to let him out of isolation if he told the superintendent how he kept doing it. But Pee Wee remembered the last deal he made when he surrendered, and he required a written agreement. And then after they signed it, he showed him how he used his own belt to pick the locks.
Oh,
Oh, if only that was the end of the story.
yeah, that'd be great.
When he turned 18, Mary, his mom and stepdad were there to pick him up as he came out the doors, and he found work as a day laborer on a construction job, working weekends completing side repair work. Then Mary got pregnant, and the couple moved from Florence to Georgetown to be closer to Mary's family. There, Pee Wee worked logging cypress in the swamps of Little Pee River in Horry County. The heat, mosquitoes, and gnats made the work almost unbearable, according to Pee Wee, but the pay was worth it. Still, the contract ended after only a few weeks, and he started going to the roadhouse after work. There, he met up with Slick Duck, or Slick for short.
Nothing good ever happens at a roadhouse.
Slick had a contract for him, hiring and overseeing harvesters and graders and hanger workers for 3 tobacco planters in the area. But hard, honest work wasn't Slick or Pee Wee's forte. After weeks of working together with Mary in the fields, and then helping with mechanic repairs, Pee Wee wanted more. So he stole tobacco from his employers and sold it on his own. He and Slick also began to burn down barns for farmers, taking part of insurance
Ugh,
scams, which were big in the area. And so what would happen is these tobacco farmers would say that their barns are filled with tobacco, and then they burned,
right.
so they got money for the tobacco
And the
in the
barn,
barn,
and
but the
yeah,
tobacco was sold under the table or to other
genius.
areas. Yeah.
That's a
Mhm.
pretty good scheme there.
So at this time, they were making over 2,000 in a couple months, and with the money, they bought a new Chevy a week before his daughter was born on April 17th, 1952.
Hmm.
He was successful for a year until 2 of the farmer's daughters told him they knew he was the one burning barns. According to Pee Wee, one of the girls kept ragging on him. Then she said she should tell her father he tried to rape her. Quote, "But you ain't worth the trouble, Pee Wee. You ain't even good enough to kiss my ass." End quote.
Whoa.
This is according to Pee Wee. So he had enough, picked up a hammer, and beat her with it.
Oh,
The second girl ran, and instead of chasing her, he ran home and grabbed the truck, taking off. He hid for 2 nights in a deserted tenant shack, and he was awoken by the law surrounding him. One of the police officers shot twice into the shack, and Pee Wee surrendered immediately. Pee Wee was charged with attempted murder, and pled down to the charge of manslaughter, excuse me. However, according to him, the deal wasn't accepted after his plea was entered, and so he did 5 years plus 1 for contempt. And since Pee Wee was an adult, he was sentenced for another attempted murder and sent to prison in the state penitentiary in Columbia.
oh, so he accidentally killed, or not
Yeah.
accidentally, but he killed that girl.
hmm And then
Yikes.
they were, yeah,
Hold on.
I know, I can hear it.
I'm gonna start recording.
In order to survive, Pee Wee realized he was going to have to do something drastic. And at this time, some of the top predator inmates were known as power men. They were left alone by other inmates, and the guards gave them the easy jobs to do. And so he was first sent into the cell of a man named Arthur, one of the power men, who beat and raped Pee Wee whenever he wanted. After 6 months of torture, he knew he had to do something. So he set himself to become a power man, but in order to do that, he needed to kill one of the current ones.
Oh, whoa.
In this case, he chose Hazel Brazel, a man even Arthur was afraid of. I guess people were so afraid of him they wouldn't use his first name. Not even the guards would call him Hazel.
Huh.
A large and intimidating man. So Pee-wee started by integrating himself into Brazel's like routine, giving him sandwiches and orange crush sodas until like there was be guys outside of his cell and until they would just like let him in because he was known.
Uh-huh.
And when the boys yeah, like stopping him essentially. And so Pee-wee then stole a paring knife from the kitchen, walked into Brazel's cell, and I guess this day that he decided to do it, the guy was sitting on the toilet and, he's like, "Oh, I've got your sandwich and your orange crush." And he's like, "It's fine, just fucking bring it in or whatever." And so he like brought it in, set it down, and just turned and slit his throat while he was on the
Wow.
toilet.
Oh, that's dirty. That's
hmm
mean.
In the end, the play worked and Pee Wee became one of the power men inside the prison, second to Arthur. So there was a funny, like, offshoot about this. At first, he thought Arthur was going to be pissed or there was going to be more problems, like, oh, shoot, like, what if he says, like, I didn't order this or all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they pulled Arthur in and they were like, well, you're the power man. You had to have, done the hit or whatever. And because that made Arthur even bigger, he's like, "Yep, sure did."
Oh,
And they signed it like a plea. They both ended up pleading to it. But because Brazel was so hated in the prison, it was like charged down to like manslaughter or
wow.
something. Like it was insane the way that it sounded like the story played out. Like even the guards were like, "Oh, thank God he's
Like
gone."
he's gone.
Yeah. So and he ended up only getting like a few more months on top of what he was already doing.
The Power Man or Power Men is such a silly name.
It is, and I have literally never heard it before, and I'm like, "What is this?" As I'm looking it up, and it was in one of the books that he talks about because Pee-wee, a lot of the information comes from a book that he talks to a journalist, and that's how you get all this information. They talk about his crimes up until he dies. He's the one who says "Power Men," and I'm like, I have never heard this
I know,
before,
it's
but
so goofy.
you keeping it.
Yeah.
In 1953, Mary filed for divorce, so he decided he needed to escape once again. And in
Okay.
1955, so it took him 2 years to do it, he escaped through a garbage truck, stealing a car and driving it to Lake Wales, Florida to meet up with a traveling carnival once again. He knew Paz would be there, and he met up with him and his wife, Paz's wife and children, somehow managing to convince Paz to go on the road while leaving his wife behind,
Oh,
sending
wow.
money to the carnival from the carnival back to her home like every week or whatever. One time when the duo went back to see Paz's family, his wife introduced Pee-wee to Junice Alice Holden, a 19-year-old. The two got married quickly, but were only together for 2 weeks before the excitement wore off as their money ran out, so Pee-wee left her and returned to the carnival again. He worked behind a girl show, spending more and more time at the shows. There, he met a contortionist. He has a thing for women, you're
Oh,
gonna find
yeah.
out. Um, so he met a contortionist, Helen McCoy.
I mean, I feel like almost all men probably would have a thing for a contortionist
Contortionist,
or
yeah. Together, the two ran off to Tennessee, and on the way, she confessed her real name was Betty Jean Gates. When they arrived in Cookville, Betty cried to Pee-wee, telling him she needed money to bail her brother out of jail, eventually convincing Pee-wee to deliver him some money and a carton of cigarettes to her brother, as she herself was wanted in the state.
oh god, they're perfect, a match made in heaven.
He did as she asked, returning back to the hotel to find that she had left and taken the car and belongings.
Oh,
Soon after, local police were at his door. The cigarette carton housed a weapon that Betty's brother used to escape.
no.
Only it wasn't Betty's brother, but it was her husband.
Oh my god, Betty's a badass.
That sounds like a movie.
That
For his part, Pee-wee was returned to South Carolina where he faced charges of escape along with the continuation of his sentence.
Can I just say, um, so Betty, number one, is incredible.
Mm,
But on the like whole escape narrative here,
mhm.
Shawshank Redemption
Oh no.
the biggest load of crap. It took him forever. He like dug out with like a spoon or something like that from the wall. Turns out all you need is any piece of metal and you can pick those locks with no issue and just walk out.
This was a different time. Even um, the big penitentiary here, they had escapes before, and they've like there's this whole narrative or like history of it that was like, oh, the wall was built. Oh, the wall was built higher. Oh, the wall was built higher in order to start
Right.
containing people
Trying.
appropriately.
Oh, man. It just is like,
One day we'll talk about it. That penitentiary is a very dark history.
oh, I bet you could say that about all of them.
Yes, I believe that. So in 1961, Pee Wee was paroled. After release, he worked as a driver and personal assistant for a traveling minister, Reverend George E. Todd.
Well,
While the minister was delivering his sermons, Pee Wee used the time to burglarize local
oh
homes that
my
were empty.
God, that's so crazy.
Again, he lasted a year. Then in 1962, he got married again to Jerry Dolores, an almost 18-year-old. But later in the year, he raped a 12-year-old girl,
Oh,
Patsy, for which he was convicted. When he was brought to the courthouse and they put him in a second-story waiting room. There, they had taken his cuffs off and manacles and left him in the room. In order to escape, he jumped out a window and landed on a boxwood hedges, stealing a car and driving to his mother's in order to get his hidden cash.
oh my God.
Then he left again, driving to Robertson County in North Carolina onto indigenous lands, the Lumbee tribe. He was told they didn't particularly care for the law and guessed he'd be relatively safe.
Hmm.
He stayed with a woman paying for cash for the space rented, and by his second month there, he married 17-year-old Lenny.
Man, who are these women?
I don't know.
I know they're all young. They're not women, they're girls.
They're girls, yeah. He
They don't
stayed
know
with
better
her
yet.
for 3 months before calling back to Jerry. Jerry and he took off for the carnival, only to find that Paz had killed himself months prior,
Oh,
after finding out his wife and children were killed in a house fire.
oh my gosh.
hmm So after that, the couple decided on going to Florida, but Pee Wee started speeding and the law quickly was on his tail. Instead of pulling over, he sped off, but his tire blew and it threw the vehicle into the marsh. And he took off while Jerry ran to police. And he managed to find a railway and caught a train back to his landlady's property. After that, he contacted Lenny, who was rightfully pissed after finding out he was married before. The news had broadcast his picture and that he was likely dead after the chase led to the vehicle's swampy crash
Oh,
because it sunk in the marsh.
that's like not the thing you should be saying.
Yeah.
Giving him like he's just now a nobody floating around the world.
After meeting up with Lenny, the two went out to eat and then back to the boarding house where he drifted off, being awoken by 5 lawmen surrounding him. Lenny was pissed. She called the police. And after 2 weeks in jail, he was extradited back to Florence County.
Okay, I love all of these women who are just sort of like screwing him.
Lenny was like, I'm sorry, you were already married when we got married,
Yeah,
and then you went back to her?
what is wrong with you?
Yeah. So he had a conviction there for the statutory rape that he had committed right after he got married to that 12-year-old, and he was sentenced to 6 years plus 2 for the original escape. For that, he went back to prison until 1968.
Hmm,
During this stint in prison, sources reported he vowed not to return to prison ever again.
yeah.
Of course. In 1968, the now 35-year-old Pee Wee was once again released to the world with stipulations. Upon release, he was not permitted to return to Florence County for 2 years.
Hmm.
So naturally, he moved to Sumter, which is the county right next to Florence, and staying in a rundown house with a barn, taking a job with a construction company, but using the barn to steal cars and parts and fix them up to sell.
Because that's how you don't go back to prison.
Mm-hmm.
Steal cars.
Definitely. He started buying stolen items from some of the younger boys, but one time one of their older brothers came in and robbed Pee Wee. In return, Pee Wee went to his home, grabbed a Beretta and an Arkansas toothpick, which is an 11-inch double-edged blade that was hand-forged like stiletto style and as sharp as he could get it.
Whoa.
He drove to the boys' home and waited until they came back, and when they did, he made them get in the trunk of the car and took them 20 miles away into the swamps. Once in the swamps, he got them out and stripped them and threatened to string them up and cut off their members if they ever crossed him again,
Whoa.
leaving the pair out in the swamp as he drove away. During this time, Pee Wee reported that he used to get this pain inside of him, that's what he called it, that he would fantasize about stringing women up and whipping them. but originally he would just drive up and down the coast until the pain subsided. That was until September
Oh,
1969 when Pee-wee picked up a female near Myrtle Beach.
oh no.
Uh-huh. She was a hitchhiker, and he propositioned her for sex. When she declined, he pretended to pull over to let her out, and when she turned to grab her duffel bag in the back seat, he punched her in the side of the head, knocking her out. Then tied her with his belt and drove another half-mile into the backwoods with her on the floorboards, finding a dirt road to pull out on. He proceeded to bring out his Arkansas toothpick to keep her quiet, and then beat, raped, and tortured her.
I gotta ask, this Arkansas toothpick, is
It's,
there a practical use for it?
I
Or is
don't.
it just like the name of
It's what he calls it.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was like a tool that I am unfamiliar with.
No, I don't think so, because it's hand forged.
Right.
So I'm. I don't know if it's like the same style. That's what he calls it.
Okay.
So this is where, I mean, he's gonna get a lot worse
Yeah.
really fast. So he cut off one of her nipples and made her eat it
Oh, what?
after he chewed on it himself.
What?
So we dropped deep into the torture game real fast.
Yeah, that was like the escalation of a lifetime right
hmm
there.
When he was done, he wrapped her shirt around her blood-soaked chest and then drove off with her, stopping to get gas and a 50-foot clothesline. Pee-wee then drove to a local swamp, pulling her out and tying her up with the clothesline, and he took his Arkansas toothpick and cut her with it. When he
Mm.
was done, he added weights to her and her duffel bag and threw them in the swamp, watching until the bubbles stopped.
Oh, God.
The only thing he kept was her money, about $300, and some items he believed weren't traceable.
Hmm.
So this begins his reign of terror.
Yeah.
And he knew at this point that he'd continue killing. But he also realized a few things from this encounter. He could have been caught a few times due to his ill planning. So he started buying handcuffs, chains, and ropes, but never all at the same place, keeping these items in his vehicle. By his own admission, Pee-wee states, quote, "Some of them I cut, some I burned. I ran a cable in and out one. I hung her up by it. I pumped another one full of water, which seemed to really hurt, filling her up until it came out of her nose and mouth, but she died quick,
What?
which I hadn't expected, so I didn't do that anymore. I preferred them to last as long as possible."
Oh my
End,
God.
end quote.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I
I know,
can't, like,
I know,
that one was a tough one.
I know.
That's crazy.
So that's the level of depravity we're going to talk about.
Oh, God. Okay. Everyone, like, shake it out real bad.
So he was riding up and down the coast specifically for victims now, not just for sex. And by December of 1969, Pee-wee reported killing 2 more people. Then in 1970, he averaged 1 body every 6 weeks,
Whoa.
claiming that along the coast he ended up with approximately 80 victims.
Has that been verified?
No, not all of them,
Okay.
because they haven't found all the
Oh, well,
bodies.
I was just gonna say that too. They probably don't ever find any of these bodies that he's dumping into the marshes.
Yeah, so it's hard. A lot of them, it's like the missing coincides with what he says, and
Huh.
so it's likely that he is the killer because there's so many that match.
Oh, God. I mean, it would make sense. Like, he jumped into brutality right away. This
Yep.
is something he wants to do, and he's only gonna keep doing it.
hmm In November of 1970, Pee-wee offered his own 15-year-old niece, Janice Kirby, and Janice's friend, Patricia Alsobrook, a ride home one night. The girls had known him for years, calling him Uncle Pee-wee. Janice had been drinking, and Pee-wee took them to get coffee to sober them up, but Janice threw up in his back seat. So Pee-wee took the girls to his tenant house in the country. Patricia and Pee-wee showered Janice, getting soaked themselves. And then when Janice was clean, they were brought to the bedroom. There, Pee-wee attempted to rape Janice, but Patricia hit him with a 2x4. The girls attempted to take off, but were caught by Pee-wee. He hit Janice with a blow to the head with his Beretta. Patricia continued to fight. In the end, Pee-wee reported he gave up trying to rape them, but knew they had to die. So he opened the septic pit in an abandoned house and pushed Patricia into it.
Oh my God, that's his niece.
That's the friend.
Okay.
Janice,
Janice is the niece.
yeah, Janice, he says, died while he was out dealing with Patricia. He thinks he hit her too hard in the head with the Beretta, which I was like, yeah, I'm sure, with the butt of a gun. Like, if you hit him hard enough, of course that's going to kill him. So I guess she was like agonal breathing before he left, and he knew she was going to be dead by the time he got back, and she was. And so he buried Janice and put sticks and stuff over the gravesite.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's family.
That's crazy. Like, I mean, it's all, again, like, there's the human connection that you would assume maybe, like, would stop someone from doing this. Like, they've got 8 ounce of, like, human in them where
Mm-hmm.
they would be able to, for a second, have that flashback of a memory of when Janice was learning how to walk or
Yeah.
whatever, right? Like, but no,
Mm-mm.
not at
And
all.
he says originally, which I don't believe at all, but he says originally, like, he was just gonna uh, rape her to show her, like, to not drink. Like, that was his justification,
Oh my God.
and that she needed to be a better girl. But then they started fighting, so then he had to kill them.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that's where his head went. I'm like, no, no.
Yeah. I mean, his head doesn't have any normal pathway in it at all.
Mm-mm.
So,
In December 1970, Pee Wee claimed to have killed 13-year-old Peggy Coutinho, though he had an alibi and another man was convicted for her murder. Pee Wee reported that he was given sodium amytal during his confessions as part of a deal much later. He continued to report that Peggy was amongst his victims, but that the state refuted his claim, as Junior Pierce was found guilty and served time for her murder. And
mm,
sodium amytal, or amobarbital, was once known as truth serum. It's a barbiturative derivative drug that has sedative hypnotic qualities. Its label as truth serum was given as people under the influence were more likely to say things they might not otherwise, likely due to the relaxing properties more than anything else. It's also highly addictive, rapid acting, and can cause withdrawals with minimal use. It's no longer given as part of interrogations or in conjunction with polygraph testing, particularly after determining that a person could be convinced of false memories while under the
hmm
influence. Other uses included treating shell shock in World War II, but benzodiazepines' rise in popularity for medical use in the late 80s, early 90s reduced the need for amobarbital to the point where it ceased being manufactured in the mid 1990s. You knew I had to tell you about it.
Yeah. I had heard about it. I had also known that you were just more likely to talk.
Yeah,
So, like, some of the stuff you'd
yeah.
say maybe wasn't even truthful.
Yeah, which is what Pee Wee basically says, that he didn't, like, he could think his way into believing a story so he could pass a polygraph, or
Hmm.
the true serum didn't, like, he had already figured this story in his
Right.
head, so even if you give him that, it didn't change anything.
Right.
And we all know I don't believe in polygraphs, so that's fine.
Yeah.
I agree. In June of 1971, Pee Wee married again and started working at Kolb's Used Cars, rebuilding vehicles. That year, 11 of the 80 coastal killings occurred, according to Pee Wee. Additionally, a woman named Martha Dix began hanging around his repair shop, and at first the two were friendly, even though she was black and a lesbian, which he did not care for, according to him.
Mm.
But Pee Wee reported that she started joking that he ate her out better than her girlfriend and that he had filled her up. And he started to get annoyed by that joking, that it was like one sided and relentless. She did leave on a hiatus for a few weeks, and when she returned, this time she was saying she was pregnant and it was his. And even if he was married, she was naming the child Pee Wee Dix.
Oh my God.
He had enough of that, and one night Pee Wee invited her to the shop after hours for some drinks, giving her some pills, and when she was high, he cuffed her and gave her an entire bottle of pills, causing her to overdose and die in the trunk of his car. Then he weighted her and dumped her in a drainage ditch, then went to the tenant house where he continued to like clean up his car.
Oh. She was a lesbian.
Uh-huh.
Why was she like taunting him so much?
Because she sounds like she just had the personality where she joked around
Mm.
about a lot of things, and then I bet you it look like it made him uncomfortable. So then, you know how some people's personalities, they pick up on that and then that's where they go.
Mm-hmm.
So that sounds like what happened. Like he was uncomfortable by it and told her to stop. So then naturally she's like, well, gotta ramp it up.
Yeah, I guess also it's from his account, so
Yeah.
he viewed it in a
Mm-hmm.
certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas she might have just like made a joke once, and then from that point forward,
Yeah.
like his mind was made up.
Yep.
Yeah.
To end the year, he picked up a girl named Ann Culberson hitchhiking from Myrtle Beach back to Georgia. Pee Wee took her to the tenant house and kept her for 4 days.
Whoa.
There, he raped and tortured her, and when he was ready, he knocked her out and then buried her next to Janice. And as he laid her down in the dirt, he slit her throat and then covered her with the dirt.
4 days.
Of torture. And I can't imagine what he was doing because, I mean, the first girl, he cut off a nipple.
I
He talks
know.
about pumping somebody full of water,
I know.
like
What
4 days of it.
4 days? I
hmm
like what an awful end to your life.
hmm In 1972, he and his family moved to North Charleston. There, he got a job with Piquet Construction and part time work with auto garages. While he didn't always murder people, his other criminal enterprises ran the risk of leading to murder. Such is the case as when he decided to become part of an auto theft ring with Dennis Bellamy, who was 25, and his younger half brother Johnny Knight, who was only 15. One night, after being worried that one of them was going to go talk to the police, he met the pair out in the woods to discuss their future endeavors. Out in the woods, Pee Wee shot one of them in the back of the head. As the other took off, he shot him as well. Both bodies he buried. In another case in Charleston, Pee Wee met Eddie Brown, a 24-year-old that liked to steal guns and sell them. After a while, Pee Wee considered Eddie and his wife Bertie friends and even invited them over to dinner on several occasions. That's how Pee Wee learned to convert guns from semi to full automatic.
Wow.
That went on until Eddie got picked up by the ATF. Reminder, if you don't know, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The ATF had connected Eddie to a string of stolen military guns. Eddie called Pee Wee when he was let out of questioning and asked if he could sell some of the guns he was still holding so that Eddie could get a good lawyer. And Pee Wee gave him the information for his tenant house in Sumter, telling him to meet there. Pee Wee brought his family back to town with him, having his wife and child stay with her family, and then he went to the tenant house and dug a hole.
Oh.
The next day, Eddie and Bertie showed up, and Pee Wee walked them to the barn where he claimed to have some weapons for selling. Instead, he picked up a rifle that he had already converted from semi to full automatic and its 30-round clip in it. He turned to the couple and opened fire, nearly cutting Eddie in half.
Oh my gosh.
Bertie was hit but not dead, so he picked up his Arkansas toothpick and walked back to her, grabbing her ankles and dragging her to the hole. At the edge, he slit her throat and rolled her in.
Oh.
After
He's so tiny. I keep forget like
he's only 5'4".
I know in my brain I'm like seeing him as this like monstrous devil and he's just a peewee.
Yeah. So yeah, but he's been in prison forever, so I bet you he's got a lot of
He's
muscle.
tough. He's
Yeah, I
scrappy.
bet you it's all muscle too.
Yeah.
So I'm not super surprised by it. After he went back for Eddie and managed to get him in the hole as well, cleaning up behind him and burying them both. Pee Wee said it just made sense. Eddie would have likely rolled on him, and they couldn't have that.
Mm, That's
Sad.
yeah, it's ridiculous.
In 1973, while the family was away for a weekend getaway at the beach, someone set fire to his family home. While he had torched many barns for the insurance money, he didn't believe in it himself, so he lost
Mm.
almost everything in the fire. Deciding someone must have been really upset to do such a thing, he thought it was time to move away from Charleston for a while, so he moved back to Florence to the community of Prospect, living there for 6 months.
So he thinks someone set his home on fire then.
Mhm.
Okay.
In October of 1973, Jackie Freeman, a 14-year-old runaway from Minnesota, was picked up by Pee Wee. He took her to an abandoned house near his old hideout, keeping her for 2 days. This time he reported that he sliced pieces of her and cooked and ate them.
Oh God. I feel like I haven't heard of this man, which is
Crazy?
pretty shocking because I feel like, the cannibal cases are so, like, just, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but blown up. Like, you hear about them.
Hmm.
It's usually so, like, Dahmer is so,
Hmm.
so well known. And
Hmm.
this guy seems
Worse.
way
Yeah.
worse.
I don't know. I don't know how some people get to be so infamous and others don't.
I know.
Like, they're all equally terrible.
They are. And it's like sold that Dahmer is like the worst.
Hmm.
But I'm like, this is insane.
Hmm.
So yeah, how did this not just have its own Netflix special,
Yeah.
right? You know?
Yeah. He said he also had made her eat some of it and that he got sick of her crying about everything. And so at the end of the second night, he took her into the swamp, slit her throat, and buried her.
Oh,
Later the same year, Pee Wee helped a family friend, one that he had known since his time in the carnival, Doreen Dempsey, a 23-year-old single mother of a 2-year-old Robin, excuse me. She was pregnant again and seeing a man named Johnny Sellers at the time. The little family showed up in Prospect looking for a place to stay. Johnny was drinking and left after saying he needed to go to Columbia, leaving Doreen and Robin at Pee Wee's. Pee Wee took her outside and told her he had a trailer near Roper's Crossroads that she could stay in, that the apartment they were in was just too small, but he didn't want his wife to know that he had the trailer.
ugh.
So, in exchange for her living there, he would come over for sex. They agreed, and Doreen went into the house and told his wife that she was going back to Charleston. Pee Wee told his wife he was going to drive Doreen and Robin to the bus station. Instead, he drove out to the swampy woods, telling Doreen he wanted a blowjob first. While she serviced him, he took a hammer and struck her in the head.
Oh my gosh. That's a risky move.
I know. I know it is. And then, you're not going to like this. Brace yourself,
I'm
please.
ready.
I am being nice about this.
Yeah.
He raped Robin and choked her to death, the 2-year-old.
Oh.
He goes into much more graphic detail, and I'm not going to do that for you. Then he pulled Doreen out of the car, slit her throat, and buried her, and dooming the unborn child as well. Because remember, she's pregnant.
Yeah, I was remembering that.
He buried Robin under a tree stump near her mother.
Oh, that's so thoughtful.
Mm.
Sorry, I'm like so angry at this man.
Yeah, yeah. A
I
2-year-old.
I know. It's like you don't mess with a 2-year-old. They're like the perfect image of humans.
Yeah, I know. He's a horrible, horrible human being. In 1974, the family moved again back to North Charleston. In March of 1974, he picked up a pair of hitchhikers, a pair of boys this time. He cuffed them and took them up north, out into the swamps, where he sodomized them, then cut them open, taking out their testicles and cooking them.
Oh,
Later, Pee Wee states he not only ate his victims, but also forced them to eat bits of themselves, Hannibal Lecter style. When he was done, they too were weighted down and put into the marshes.
God, he's really given the marshes a lot of bodies.
Yes, he is. Around this time, Johnny Sellers came back into Pee Wee's life. Though he didn't like him much, he moved in with James, Judy, and Jesse Ruth, who were married at the time. After a few months, Jesse and Johnny went off to get a place of their own, leaving James. But Pee Wee did deals with both Johnny and James. And so he said that this time he still kind of did under the table dealings with them, but tried to keep them separated. But the more and more he worked with Johnny, the more annoyed he got with them. And Johnny started to owe him more and more money from what they were doing
Mm.
together. And so this, along with the fact that he was still mad that Johnny left that night, leaving Doreen and Robin at his house, he felt like Johnny was just trying to make Pee Wee stuck with the pair of them, essentially. So one evening, Johnny, Jesse, and Pee Wee stole a boat and took it to a third party, Belton. Belton was upset, saying the law had been watching him and he was getting out of stolen goods. But Pee Wee was like pissed. And he told Jesse to go inside and took Johnny out for a ride. pulling over and pulling out a pistol. He disarmed Johnny, who took off, so Pee Wee shot him in the back of the head as he ran, dropping him. Then he went and picked up Jessie and took her to the same spot, stabbing her in the neck with his Arkansas toothpick and burying them both.
Ugh.
Next, he met up with a man named Horace Jones by recommendation from a man he knew while he was in prison. Horace came to live with them while they did their dealings, and one time while he was out, Pee Wee returned to his wife saying that Horace tried to force himself on her but ended up attacking two of her friends instead. And so Pee Wee went out and dug a hole.
God.
Getting Horace, telling him about a con he wanted them to pull. And so he basically told Horace, like, hey, we're going to go to this old lady's house and you have to dress up and look nice and charm her. And then I'm going to steal stuff while you're doing that. And so Horace is like, okay. And so they went out and Horace, he like walked him to the hole, and then pulled out his Beretta and told him to like sit down. And so
Oh,
Horace sat down and he shot him twice in the back of the head.
this guy just is like,
That's the
just,
only one that I can understand. Where I'm like, all right, he raped two of your wife's friends. Like, if
oh,
you're already a murderer, this is the
100%.
only one where I'm like,
Like, yeah.
okay.
But it's like he's just all like anyone and everyone in his vicinity is gonna get killed, it
Yeah.
feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're just the coworker who makes a offhanded joke.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna die.
Yep. So personally, for him, by the end of the year, he and his latest wife were separated, and his son was staying with his eldest daughter. If you forget, he has two kids.
Yeah, I did forget that,
Yeah.
actually.
It doesn't sound like the daughter's in his, like, there's made mention of him, and I've read a couple books about him, and they don't name her, but that she does, like, offer a few quotes in one of the
Uh-huh.
books about her dad, so she does have some, like, dealings with him, but it sounds like she was very
I mean,
removed from him.
he was busy.
Yeah. In 1975, he kept up with the Coastal killings, again about one a month, and he met up with Walter Neely, another criminal with whom he had spent time with at CCI, and in him he ended up finding a friend. They weren't close until Pee Wee needed help one night, so he was out on the road one evening when he spotted a broken down van. He pulled over and acted as though he was there to help, and there was two women and a man who didn't suspect anything amiss until Pee Wee attacked them.
Mm.
He handcuffed the three and began to torture them. He then took them to the swamp and drowned them all. Of this type of death he stated, quote, "It's hard to say which one suffered the most. I tried to make it equal," end quote.
God.
He also said that he found this to be a challenge because there was three
I
of
was
them.
just gonna say, he took down 3 people.
But I feel like you bring out a gun and that's quite an equalizer.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So,
There's not much you can do, really,
mhm.
to get the upper hand when someone's got a gun in their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
After their deaths, he felt he needed to dispose of the van, so that's when he called Walter. The two brought it back to Pee Wee's shop where he painted and refurbished it, then sold it for a profit. As he did it, he told Walter of the murders, and Pee Wee kept talking about earlier murders as well, even taking Walter to some of their grave sites.
Whoa.
Pee Wee again tried to get more money for his crimes. This time he did so by becoming a hitman, according to him. His first kill was Silas Yates, the ex-boyfriend of Susan Kipper. For this he was paid $1,500, and since Pee Wee was known, he brought in accomplices Diane Neely and John Powell and John Owens, who were meant to lure Silas out to Pee Wee. They did so, and afterwards Silas was disposed of. But days later, Pee Wee received another call. This time it was Diane herself, along with her boyfriend Avery Howard. Only they didn't want to hire him, they wanted to blackmail him.
Oh.
The sum of $5,000 for their silence. Pee Wee agreed, and he met them in a secluded area, where they were subsequently
Of
murdered.
course they were. Why would you ever meet that man?
Mhm.
Oh.
So I know that we just talked about his first murder for hire. Well, Pee Wee later married Suzanne.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to her, he's sort of like her rescuer.
Mm-hmm. I guess. So it sounds like the guy that he was set to kill Susan and him were in a relationship. They had everything together. They had a house. And then one day he came home and was like, get the fuck out. And like just booted her. And
She was
she
like,
wanted revenge.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
or I want to keep this house.
Yeah. Another time, two people broke into Pee Wee's shop and attempted to rob him. For this, they were murdered, and Walter helped dispose of the two bodies. It's not the shop you break into.
No, it is not the shop you think you're breaking into.
Pee Wee met 13-year-old Kim Gaskins. He hit on her and she declined his advances. So Pee Wee abducted her and then raped her and murdered her and put her in the same swampy woods as many of the other victims.
Wow.
Her family notified police of her disappearance, and her association with Pee Wee led them to obtain a search warrant for his home. There, they found clothing, and while they couldn't arrest him for murder without having Kim's body, Pee Wee was notified on November 13th, 1975, by Walter that he was still indeed a wanted man.
I mean, he had some like little keepsakes and such.
He did.
So
So Pee Wee took all of his torture tools out to the swamp and sunk them, but he couldn't part with his Arkansas
of
toothpick,
course he couldn't.
so he put it in the mail. Then he took a taxi aimed for a bus station to get out of town when the taxi was surrounded and he was arrested for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. That's what they could get him on. In jail, he kept his mouth shut, but police began branching out, talking to those in his life. It is here local police began talking to Walter Neely.
Walter's got too much information.
He very quickly had a lot to say.
Yeah.
And even took them to several of the dump sites. Ira Parnell Jr., a South Carolina state investigator, was with Walter and 15 other investigators when the grave sites were identified. At the first site Walter led them to, 6 bodies were found. At this location, all bodies were found in pairs. So he'd like bury one and then bury the next victim next to him and then move on to like a slightly different area. I don't know why. It doesn't say. And he doesn't say. On April 27, 1976, Pee Wee and Walter were both charged with 8 counts of murder in Florence County. The first conviction was for that of Dennis Bellamy, in which eyewitnesses, forensic evidence, and circumstantial evidence made a compelling case. The trial started on May 24, 1976. 5 days later, he was found guilty and received the death sentence. However, in 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the death penalty unconstitutional as it was a violation of the Eighth Amendment. His sentence was commuted to life in prison. That was until 1978 when the U.S. Supreme Court overruled its original decision that banned capital punishment. The new ruling allowed each state to decide whether or not they would keep the death penalty. South Carolina opted to keep the death penalty. In order to push out the death sentence from being carried out, Pee Wee made several confessions to unknown murders, for which he received 7 consecutive life sentences.
Oh my God.
Still, his lust for killing continued while he was behind bars.
What?
In 1982, Pee Wee killed another death row inmate, supposedly in a contract killing.
Oh.
Rudolph Tyner was the inmate who was believed to be, quote, don't come at me for this, okay? Sorry.
Okay.
Before I get to the quote.
Yeah.
Quote, semi-retarded, very low IQ guy, end quote. I didn't say that. Pee Wee did.
Okay.
Rudolph had killed an elderly couple in 1978, William and Myrtle Moon. Rudolph had entered the couple's small convenience store and robbed the pair. After leaving, he returned and killed them both. The pair's adopted son, Tony Simo, didn't want to wait for the penalty of his crimes, believing that his appeals were keeping him alive longer than it should, and he got in touch with Pee Wee through like a proxy within the prison.
Okay.
Pee Wee happened to be depressed. While he had successfully escaped as a juvenile in his first stint, he was now in a much higher security level prison and unable to break out when he wanted.
Thank God.
Finally. When asked about contract killing, Pee Wee stated, quote, because all this happened at the time I just described, when I wasn't making no headway with my own escape plans and I was feeling even downer than usual. I took it as a personal challenge. Beside, I figured there weren't nobody in CCI I couldn't get to if I wanted, and it seemed to me this Tyner truly did deserve to die, end quote. Okay,
like you're the judge of character on that matter?
Exactly. Exactly.
No, thank you.
Just like his first kill, or yeah, in prison, Pee Wee started by befriending Rudolph, taking him food and drugs. This time, however, he didn't want to be found guilty of this murder, so he attempted to poison Rudolph, but it simply just made Rudolph sick. He tried again and again it just made him sick. So instead, Pee Wee made a jailhouse telephone so that he could call Rudolph, and the two would be able to communicate. Tony was able to smuggle in small amounts of C4 to Pee Wee. Pee Wee then transported them in a compartment that he had cut into the heel of a work boot. From there,
Wow.
he took the state-issued cup and seal for a blasting cap, explosive and wires all put into it. Giving it
Wow.
to Rudolph once it was ready, telling him it was the receiver for the phone. And it worked. Rudolph believed him, and so he put the receiver to his ear on September 12th, 1982, and Pee Wee connected the electrical wire on his end, causing it to blow, killing him instantly. The explosion was large enough to rock the entire block.
That's like
Wild.
insane. He got C4 brought into the prison. That is really a very inventive way.
C4 doesn't look like much, though.
It's like clay, right?
Yeah,
It's
it
like a.
looks like clay, so I'm sure it was not that,
Oh no, it would be.
obviously, hard
I'm
to
saying
make.
it's like incredible. It's like,
Ingenious,
why is this
unfortunately.
not happen more? Like, it seems like, I guess it's hard to get your hands on some C4,
Yeah,
but maybe not.
I don't know.
Oh, the internet these days. I'm sure they now actually do like,
Is more regulated, I
yeah.
think, yeah. So upon investigation, the Tony Simo and Donald Gaskins plot to kill Rudolph was uncovered. For his part, Tony was sentenced to 25 years and eligible for parole after 30 months. He ended up spending 8 years behind bars before being granted parole. Richard Harpotulian, I'm not saying that right, I'm sorry.
That's
He
it.
was the
I like it.
prosecutor in this case. And the defense was a team of Johnny Young and Jack Swirling, who fought their client as much as the case himself. So in 1983, a jury voted to convict Pee Wee of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death for his crime. Afterwards, he was sent to MSU isolation. By June 1991, his appeals for conviction and sentencing were exhausted, and his date was set for September 6, 1991. The day before, Pee Wee slit his wrist but was unsuccessful, and his wrists were simply stitched up.
Mm.
The next morning, he was brought to the electric chair, and his final words were, quote, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go," end quote. And he gave a thumbs up, and the electrical current was engaged. 10 minutes later, he was pronounced dead.
Wow, 10 minutes later.
Well, so they have to do it, and then they have to come in and officially
Right.
pronounce. So it's not that it took 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I mean, even if it did, sort of like, you deserve it.
Yeah. No, it was just because
I know.
they
but
don't do it quickly,
I know.
the reactions, because they have to make sure, and they go in, and then they pronounce, so it takes a
Right.
while. And I do believe that the book was written in between when he got his death sentence handed down, and then before he got, like I said, most of
Mhm.
it was his words to a journalist. There are other like corroborating evidence that I included in there, so it's not just him talking.
Mhm.
But yeah, that is the case of Donald Pee Wee Gaskins.
He's a
Horrible.
horrible human.
I know he is.
Yeah. Like, because even his, like, backstory
He's not that bad.
is not really that bad.
Yeah, I know.
So, there, like, a lot of the times when you're telling me these stories, I really, like, feel for these characters. I want to call them characters. Like, in the beginning of their life, I'm like, wow, that you're only destined to fail when you have that.
Mhm.
But he really, like, sure, his mother let him drink
Mhm.
kerosene.
Kerosene. Yeah, I think though that she
But,
was getting her life together when they started having more kids, and I'm like, "Oh, man, I feel
right,
like you coulda made something of
right.
yourself, and you didn't."
Yeah. So he just sucks all
Mhm.
around. I'm glad he's gone.
Yep. So to all those out there listening, be careful. It's a dangerous world we live in.